You ever watch a traffic stop start slow and stupid and spiral so far out of control you forget which side of the law you're even on? That was me. Officer Travis Brenner. The clock in my cruiser said 6:42 p.m. I had 2 hours left in my shift, a bitter mouthful of thermos coffee, and a silent street under fading light. Then I saw it. A sleek black Mercedes S-Class easing too carefully through a stop sign on Saluda Avenue. No rear plate, nothing but gloss and quiet. In my line of work, you learn to trust your gut. My gut said something's off. So I lit her up. What happened next was not only a lesson for the aggressors, but also a powerful reminder of empathy, responsibility, and the ongoing fight for equal dignity. We're about to share a powerful moment of truth. But first, drop your location and let us know. Have you ever witnessed or experienced something like this? Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have another incredible story, and there are many surprises waiting for you in the next parts. I was 2 years into the badge, but 10 years deep in rules passed down without question. Columbia wasn't a bad city, just one where certain neighborhoods taught you to keep your eyes sharp and your mind suspicious. I'd never pulled my weapon, never even come close, but I carried assumptions like a second belt. That night I had a whole mental file open before I even stepped out of the cruiser. No rear plate? Mercedes that clean? That's a flag. And yeah, maybe I was tired, maybe I was annoyed that my last stop had been a barking dog complaint, but when that car pulled to the curb under a blooming dogwood, I was already halfway convinced I had a stolen vehicle on my hands. I approached the window, expecting panic or fumbling. Instead, it rolled down like clockwork. No scrambling, no excuses, just a woman. Black, mid-60s, calm like church on a quiet Sunday. Silver hair, posture like steel. And the robe? Not choir, not clergy, judicial. "Good evening, officer," she said, firm but even, like she'd done this 1,000 times. "I'm Judge Renee Mallory. This is my vehicle. I'm heading home from the courthouse." That threw me. Still, I asked for license and registration, like the uniform demands. She didn't flinch. Handed them over, smooth as butter. Everything clean, drawer-locked, not a smudge of uncertainty. But my gut kept barking. "This car matches a description from earlier," I told her, slow and skeptical. She raised an eyebrow. "It's registered to me. Feel free to confirm that with dispatch." So I did. Back in the cruiser, I ran the plates, the VIN, the whole nine. Clean as glass, but something still nagged. She was too poised, too correct. That robe, that tone, it pressed all the wrong buttons in a man who wasn't ready to admit his mind had wandered off the rails. So I did what we sometimes do when we're not sure but don't want to back off. I doubled down. I asked her to step out of the vehicle. That's when her voice cut through the growing tension like a scalpel. "Is that a lawful order?" she asked. I dropped a hand near my holster, reflex more than threat, but it was too late. A teenager across the street lifted his phone. The red light blinked. A couple neighbors leaned off their porches, curious. "You've confirmed who I am," she said, louder. "You've verified this is my vehicle, and yet you're asking me to exit the car. Officer, you are now unlawfully detaining me." My throat tightened. I'd seen traffic stops go sideways before, but never while standing face-to-face with a sitting judge. And she wasn't angry, she was surgical, controlled. She didn't need volume. She had presence. When she said, "You don't see me, you see what you fear I might be," it wasn't a protest. It was a verdict. And suddenly, I wasn't a cop managing a routine stop. I was a man standing in the middle of a slow-burning courtroom I'd just built myself. The street didn't erupt, not at first. It breathed in slow. A screen door creaked across the avenue. A boy in a basketball jersey stepped out, phone already raised, red light blinking like a warning flare. Another teen leaned against a mailbox, whispering to someone over the speaker. "Yo, I think that's Judge Mallory." A woman with a tote bag paused mid-walk, her brow furrowing. It wasn't chaos, not yet. It was what came before, the held breath, the way eyes started shifting, focusing, And there I stood, badge on chest, hand too close to my belt, suddenly aware of just how many people were watching what I did next. Not just watching, recording, judging, drawing conclusions before I could make one. That cruiser light blinking blue on brick homes wasn't safety. It was a spotlight, and I was no longer alone in it. From the driver's seat, her voice rose, not in volume, but in clarity. Like a courtroom mic was under her tongue. I am Judge Renee Mallory of the 5th Judicial Circuit. This is my vehicle. You have received confirmation that it is not stolen. You are now unlawfully detaining me. The words snapped across the block like dry wood under boot. I knew the sound. I'd heard it in courtrooms when defense attorneys took off the gloves, when judges leaned forward before they ruled. This was that sound. But now it was aimed at me. And the crowd knew what it meant. A woman near the curb murmured, "He's messing up. That's the judge who let my cousin out on probation. She's fair." Someone else shouted, "That's her, bro. She's the real deal." I tried to focus on procedure, but procedure didn't cover public shaming by legal royalty in front of your own zip code. She didn't need to yell. Her tone got tighter, words crisper, each syllable like a gavel against a ribcage. "Am I being detained, officer?" I wanted to answer, wanted to say something that didn't feel like either a retreat or a threat, but my mouth wouldn't cooperate. "You've received verification, and yet you remain in a position of enforcement," she continued. "What are you enforcing? What part of the law empowers you to hold a citizen after they've been cleared?" Her fingers never left the wheel. Her eyes never left mine. No flash of fear, just a steel wire of presence that refused to bend. And I, standing there with all the authority of the state, felt like the one on trial. Her words kept swinging. "You've asked me questions 4 separate times about ownership of my own property. Not because you doubt my paperwork, but because you doubt me. That's not investigation, that's projection. That's profiling with a clip. And the worst part? She was right. I knew it. Deep in the ribs, under the vest, I could feel it. But something in me, something stubborn and trained and male and uniformed, held firm. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was fear that stepping back would look like folding. Maybe it was the whisper in the back of my mind that said, "If I let her go now, they'll say you got schooled by a woman in a robe and a badge." The badge started to feel heavier on my chest. My feet felt too wide for the sidewalk. I glanced back at the cruiser, hoping maybe dispatch would call again, give me something new to hang on to. Nothing. Just the faint hiss of silence through the radio speaker and the growing hum of the crowd murmuring like a rising tide. Then came Marcy. Officer Keller, technically, but Marcy to all of us. Late 30s, sharp ponytail, sharp mind. She'd served with me for years, always cool, always quicker to read a room than I was. She stepped out of her unit slow, scanning the scene like a detective in a film noir. She saw me, saw the car, saw the crowd. Her face didn't change, but her pace did. Measured now, cautious. She walked up and leaned in low. "Travis, what's going on?" "Routine stop," I said, voice dry. Vehicle fit a stolen description. She looked into the car, squinting. Her brows lifted. "That's Judge Mallory." I didn't answer. "I know," I finally mumbled. She sighed, long and slow. "You need to clear this." "I'm trying." "No," she said, soft but firm. The words didn't stab, they settled like cold truth, like ice cubes dumped down the back of my spine, and then, as if to stamp it in, Judge Mallory said the line that tilted the whole damn street. "You're not enforcing law, you're resisting truth." That sentence, it wasn't shouted, it didn't need echo, it had gravity. I looked up. Phones were up again, faces young and old, black and white, were watching not with anger, but with awareness that something was happening here that couldn't be walked back, that one officer's pride was trying to outweigh one woman's credentials. And it wasn't working. Not anymore. Because the badge doesn't win the argument when the truth's already louder than the siren, and I was starting to learn what it feels like when you're not the one holding the mic, but the one on the record. By sunrise, the city wasn't quiet anymore. Not in the digital sense. Not in the human one. The video 4 minutes of truth, tension, and a single raised wrist had been watched over 300,000 times, shared like a warning, paused like evidence, a traffic stop turned reckoning, a robe turned rallying cry. It played on cell phones over cereal, on tablets passed around beauty salons. People didn't just watch it. That frozen frame of Judge Mallory standing tall while the officer's hand hovered too close to the edge became more than a clip. It was a confession. And the internet, merciless and unblinking, became the courtroom. No need for a gavel. The comment section passed judgment with every refresh. This is why we march. She's the law. And still treated like a suspect. Power isn't the problem. The problem is who thinks they own it. Inside Columbia PD, things got quiet for the wrong reasons. The kind of quiet that turns good coffee bitter and forces people to stir their mugs instead of speak. The morning briefing wasn't filled with jokes or talk about the game. It was filled with one headline, slid across the desk by Chief Harold Epps. Travis Brenner judged wrongly targeted in traffic stop. Was her robe the real threat? Travis Brenner sat stiff in the corner, shirt collar suddenly too tight. He'd submitted his report. The timeline, the rationale. It didn't match the footage. Everyone knew, no one said it. The silence wasn't loyalty, it was waiting. Epps didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. You're on administrative leave, Officer Brenner. Effective immediately. With pay, standard protocol. Don't mistake that for support. Not a lecture, not a defense, just a sentence that felt like a doorway closing behind you with no click. Travis nodded, eyes fixed on a coffee stain on the conference table. He didn't protest. There was nothing left to argue that hadn't already been filmed. Across town, in a modest kitchen flooded with morning light, Renee Mallory sat in silence too, but it didn't feel like shame. It felt like something older. Heavier. Her robe was folded on the back of a kitchen chair. Her coffee was untouched. She scrolled through the video, not to relive it, but to observe it, to study the distance between knowing it happened and watching it unfold. The clip didn't surprise her. What cut deep was how familiar it felt. She looked up at the photo on her fridge, her father, Thomas Parker, standing tall in his patrol uniform. Columbia, 1977. A black officer before the city wanted to believe in them. He once told her, "The badge earns you entry, baby girl, but the skin you wear, that's what makes them question why you're there in the first place." She was 17 when she first learned that wasn't just his warning, it was her inheritance. A deputy pulled her over walking home from work with a textbook in her bag. Made her sit on the curb, asking where she lived, why she didn't have ID. She did. He didn't care. Her father had shown up, calm, furious, quietly thunderous. "Don't cry," he told her. "Don't give them the satisfaction. Just remind them who you are by existing where they said you couldn't." That night was her ignition. She built a future from that curb, one degree, one courtroom, one verdict at a time. And still, it wasn't enough to stop it from happening again. Because the robe doesn't shield the skin beneath it. It doesn't erase perception. It doesn't override the kind of thinking that sees authority as a mirror, not a responsibility. Her father used to say, "It's not that they don't see you. It's that they see a version of you that fits their fear better." The badge had changed, the city had changed, but the assumption? That was eternal. She thought about the way Officer Brenner looked at her, not with curiosity but with decision already made, how power makes the wrong man feel right until the moment it's recorded, and how fast the law gets questioned when the wrong person wears it. She didn't cry, didn't throw anything, just sat still, the steam from her mug now gone, replaced by a colder truth that the robe might carry authority, but the skin still carries risk. The conversation didn't stay in her kitchen. It moved. Barbershops buzzed, church halls hummed, Twitter threads burned white-hot with commentary and reminders. College classrooms played the clip in ethics lectures. At a diner off Gervais Street, two old men argued, one saying Brenner was just doing his job, the other replying, "Then the job needs rewriting." In a classroom at Benedict College, a criminal justice professor paused the video mid-same and asked his students, "What do you think happens when truth is caught on camera, but the system still hesitates?" The room was quiet. Then a girl raised her hand. "We talk about bias like it's invisible, but in that video, you can see it blink. In a nail salon off Two Notch Road, someone muttered, 'If that had been my mama, I'd have jumped the cruiser.' And someone else said, 'But she didn't need to. She held the law like a sword, and the city's watching now.' Everywhere people asked the same thing. Why does this keep happening? Why does power swing harder when it lands on brown skin? Why does authority get nervous when it's reflected back through dignity? And what happens next, not just to Travis, but to all the quiet bias walking around in badge form, in policy, in perception? The robe wasn't just cloth anymore. It was a question stitched in black thread. What do you see when you look at someone who outranks your assumption? And are you brave enough to admit it if you're wrong? The city blinked awake. Not because of sirens, but because one woman refused to flinch and made sure the silence had to answer her back. The hearing room wasn't grand. No marble columns or echoing chambers, just stiff-backed chairs, a pitcher of water sweating on a folding table, and the steady shuffle of papers being arranged with a kind of gravity that said, this wasn't routine. It was Judgment Day, just not in a courtroom. 5 members of the Oversight Committee sat in a row, blazers buttoned too high, expressions set to neutral. Their job wasn't conviction, it was accountability, and the weight of that was thick in the air. Renee Mallory sat straight back at the table, no robe, no podium, just posture and presence. On the other side of the room, Travis Brenner walked in through a side door, not in uniform, no badge on his chest, just a navy jacket, khakis, and a silence that stuck to him like sweat. Nobody clapped, nobody sneered, but the air itself bristled like it knew something permanent was about to be said without being shouted. A staffer dimmed the lights. The screen blinked on, and there it was. The body cam footage. From the moment the cruiser lights flashed red and blue across the brick and porch-lined street, the room leaned in. No narration, no commentary, just the sound of footsteps, the steady hum of traffic, the voice of a woman identifying herself again and again, with the same calm, the same patience. And then, minute 117 right, where the conversation sharpens, the questions repeat, and her voice begins to carry the edge of legal steel, the audio drops. Static. Muffled air. No sound. The visuals continue, her mouth moving, his stance tightening, the hand near the holster, but no sound. The silence wasn't just awkward, it felt surgical, intentional, a technical error or a moment stolen from the record. The committee chair squinted, rewound it once, then again. No change, just image without truth, motion without voice. A mute moment in the middle of a critical escalation, like someone folding a page in a story they didn't want read. Chairwoman Vera Lindell, a retired judge from Charleston, adjusted her glasses and leaned in. "Officer Brenner," she said evenly, "can you explain the gap in your body cam audio?" Travis cleared his throat. "I'm not sure. Could have been a glitch. Those units sometimes short out." She nodded once. "Are you aware your department logs show your hand brushed the mute toggle at that exact timestamp?" Travis's face twitched. "I didn't do it intentionally." Another committee member, a former civil rights attorney, spoke next. "Do you often mute your device in the middle of a stop?" Travis shook his head, but the weight behind the question didn't lift. "So, we're to believe," the man continued, "that at the precise moment a high-profile stop began to escalate, the camera failed. Not the footage, not the visual, but just the sound. Either that's incredibly convenient, or it's extremely concerning." The pause that followed was thick enough to chew. Then it was Renee's turn. She didn't shift in her chair or clear her throat like a performer. She just looked up, eyes calm and sharp, and spoke. "I'm not here to seek punishment," she began. "I'm here to make sure this doesn't repeat itself under a different name." Her voice didn't waver. "That night, I complied. I identified myself. I answered every question. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. And yet I was held, not because of what I did, but because of what he saw." She paused, letting the sentence find its gravity. "There's a dangerous assumption in this country that authority is earned by how loud you are, how firm your grip is on power. But true authority, real law, is restraint, judgment, listening. That night, none of those were present in the man who pulled me over." Her eyes flicked to Travis, but her tone remained even. "This isn't personal, it's procedural. This is about a pattern, not just one mistake. And if I don't speak on it now, I risk becoming complicit in its repetition." She leaned slightly forward. "If this can happen to me, a sitting judge, on my way home in my own car after a full day of serving the law, what's happening to the people who don't have robes or titles or witnesses? What happens to the ones who don't have a badge to flash but have every right to be left alone?" Her voice got quieter, but somehow heavier. "The robe doesn't grant me immunity, but it should at least protect me from being presumed criminal before I'm allowed to be seen as human." That landed harder than anything else. No courtroom theatrics, just one voice, steady and specific, reminding the city what accountability sounds like when it's spoken instead of shouted. The committee didn't take long. 27 minutes behind closed doors. When they returned, the room hushed. Vera Lindell stood. After reviewing all evidence, including officer reports, body cam footage, and witness testimony, the committee finds that Officer Travis Brenner engaged in conduct unbecoming of his position. His actions were excessive, unsupported by evidence, and suggest a pattern of behavior inconsistent with departmental standards. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "We recommend a 60-day unpaid suspension, mandatory bias retraining, and official censure. Further violations will result in immediate termination." There was no applause, no nods of satisfaction, just the stillness of consequence settling into place. Travis didn't speak. Renee didn't blink. The judgment wasn't about rage, it was about correction, and the courtroom didn't need a gavel because every eye in that room was louder than words. Judge Renee Mallory returned to her bench with the same quiet authority she always carried, but something in the room had shifted. Not in her demeanor, her voice remained calm, her rulings sharp, but in how others looked at her. The bailiff stood a little straighter. The young defense attorney, who normally stumbled over objections, found his rhythm. Even the defendant sat a bit taller, as if they'd seen her on screen and realized she wasn't just a judge. She was a survivor of the system she helped uphold. Across town, in a small room without rank or robes, Travis Brenner sat hunched over a notepad. His badge was gone, for now, his belt empty. The silence he once filled with authority now weighed heavier than any courtroom verdict. In the top corner of the page, he'd written one sentence and underlined it twice: "I didn't see her." No excuses, no rewording, just that, the truth in its smallest, most dangerous form. He stared at the sentence for a long time before he added more. "I saw a threat where there was none. I followed a protocol shaped by fear, not fact. I told myself I was protecting something, but I was really protecting my ego." The words felt like sandpaper in his throat, but they were real. He wrote about the voice in his head that had whispered doubt, and the louder one that insisted pride comes first. He remembered the look in her eyes, not just the moment she said he didn't see her, But when she stepped out of that car and said, without needing to yell, that truth didn't need volume, he wrote about the pause before he reached for her wrist, the weight of silence when Marcy stood between them, and how his years in uniform hadn't prepared him for what it meant to be wrong in public. This wasn't training, it was truth therapy. Line by line, painful but necessary. And it wasn't for anyone else. Not yet. It was for the man who now had to live without the illusion that his badge made him right. The city hadn't moved on, not really. Protest signs still leaned against fences. One billboard downtown, the kind usually reserved for car dealerships and insurance agents, now bore a single quote in bold black font. She gave mercy in courtrooms, he gave judgment on the street. Another billboard simply showed her face, robe and all, eyes locked on something beyond the camera, with the caption, "Respect the robe, respect the person." High school classrooms across the state had played the footage as part of new bias and ethics curricula. Civics teachers used it to teach authority. Sociology professors used it to teach perception. In one art class, a group of students painted murals of Mallory alongside historical civil rights figures. Not because she'd marched, but because she'd stood. And sometimes, in a city still figuring itself out, standing still was the loudest move you could make. What stung most for Travis wasn't the administrative leave or the disciplinary review. It was the moral math, the slow inversion of what the uniform had once meant to him. He remembered walking into courtrooms where Mallory presided, hearing her offer second chances to kids who'd made mistakes. "The system isn't here to crush you," she once said to a trembling teen who had stolen food. "It's here to correct you." And yet, on that night, it was him, Travis, who'd turned correction into confrontation, dressed in the same authority she wielded with more restraint than he had even understood. She gave leniency to those who broke the law. He gave suspicion to someone who hadn't. The irony tasted bitter now. His badge had felt like power. Hers had felt like grace. And somewhere between the two, a lesson had waited far too long to be learned. It wasn't until the following week, outside the courthouse steps, that Travis saw how far the story had traveled. He wasn't in uniform, just walking past with his hands in his jacket pockets, head down. A group of students from a local charter school were taking a civic tour, clipboards in hand, matching t-shirts, excited chatter bouncing off the marble. One boy, maybe 15, broke from the group and jogged up toward the entrance. He looked up at Judge Mallory as she descended the steps. "Hey!" he called out, voice cracking just a little. "We saw your video in class. It made us talk." She paused, not because she was surprised, but because it mattered. "Good," she said simply. "Talking's where it starts." The boy nodded, then rejoined his group. Travis watched the whole exchange from across the plaza, not out of shame this time, but out of recognition, the kind of moment you don't interrupt, the kind you carry, because in a city trying to rewrite its story, sometimes the youngest voices write the first line of the next chapter. The courtroom that morning wasn't any quieter than usual, but something about the way Judge Mallory entered made it feel different. Maybe it was the memory of her standing still beside her car while the world judged her. Or maybe it was just the silence that followed her now, the kind that came not from fear, but from respect, earned the hard way. Her docket was full, the seats lined with weary parents and anxious kids. One case stood out, a probation review, teen boy, 17. First offense, small-time theft, suspended once from school. His public defender stood beside him like a backup singer waiting for the cue. Mallory looked at the boy. Shirt too tight, tie borrowed from someone older. He stood stiff, but not defiant. She asked him his name, asked him if he understood why he was there. He nodded. "Because I messed up," he said. She let that sit. Then, in a voice that had once challenged a badge on the side of the road, she said, "No, you're here because you got caught. The real question is who you're becoming." That line didn't land like a threat. It didn't need to. It wrapped itself around the room and sat in the gut. She reviewed his file slowly, eyes scanning the details, not looking for a way to punish, but for a reason not to. Finally, she closed the folder. "I'm continuing your probation without extension. No jail time, but if you're back in this room again, you won't get another conversation. Do you understand?" He nodded fast. "Yes, ma'am." The gavel tapped once, light, like punctuation, not a sentence. As the boy left, his mother caught Mallory's eye with a glance that said everything: relief, gratitude, a history of fear. And in that moment, the courtroom wasn't heavy. It was human. Later that afternoon, Mallory sat in her parked Mercedes, staring into the rearview mirror. Same car, same angle, but the image it gave her wasn't just the back window. It was memory. The stop, the hesitation in his hand, the weight of her name being ignored, and the way the silence in that street felt like history folding in on itself. She breathed in slow, let it out slower. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, soft and firm all at once. "Your job is to remind them you belong, even when they try to say otherwise." She thought of that teenage boy, and the look in his eye when she said, "Who are you becoming?" Maybe the question was just as much for her. Not because she'd failed, but because she was still becoming too. More than a robe, more than a viral clip, more than the judge in the car. The city hadn't just moved on. It had shifted. Quietly, maybe, but the shift was real. Columbia's police department issued new protocol around traffic stops involving identified public officials. But deeper than that, community bias training was no longer optional. It was policy. Several precincts began reviewing body cam usage with independent auditors. The mayor's office released a public memo acknowledging the event not just as a mistake, but as a critical opportunity for reform. Local colleges hosted town halls titled Authority and Identity, using her story as the opening slide. It wasn't about her anymore, not really. It was about the conversations happening in rooms that once would have dismissed them. The ones led by teenagers who raised their hands and asked, what if she hadn't been a judge? What if no one filmed it? And in those questions, the city saw itself, not in shame, but in reflection. Across town, Travis Brenner sat at his kitchen table. The notepad was back out, coffee beside it gone cold, untouched. He'd written a dozen drafts since his hearing, each one more honest than the last. But today's page had a new sentence at the top. What we refuse to see can cost someone their peace. He paused, then added, it can cost us our own. He didn't write for clearance. He didn't write for forgiveness. He wrote because silence had failed him. Because assumptions had spoken louder than facts. Because he now understood that being a good officer wasn't about never making mistakes. It was about admitting when you had and changing before someone else had to pay the price. And maybe, just maybe, that was what the badge was supposed to mean all along. Respect, in the end, isn't about protocol. It's not about title or tone. It's not about who's got the louder voice or the shinier badge. Respect means most when it's hardest to give. And in that space, between the robe and the reason, between the assumption and the truth, that's where justice either fails or begins. Renee Mallory didn't just walk away from that traffic stop. She walked forward and made sure the rest of the city had to follow. Because power means nothing without humility. And stories like this, they make sure we don't forget. Leave a comment below to let us know where you are watching from, and if you like fascinating stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have another incredible story. And there are many surprises waiting for you in the next parts.